Well, good morning. Happy Sabbath. And let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear gracious, loving God in heaven and earth, we come before you on your holy Sabbath day and just rejoice that we may meet with you and with one another. Bless our time together. Be our teacher. We want to grow in Christ. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, it's been a while, and let's see if I can, as people would say, brush away the cobwebs. I'm going to share screen to see. Ask a question. Okay, all the little boxes we have to close up. Okay, what is that? Henry, what is that?
Not sure if that's supposed to be a flag
Oh,
or something else.
okay, Jonathan, what is that?
Uh,
Aka.
not
Oh,
uh,
sorry, Jonathan, go ahead.
not exactly sure. Like one of the gay pride flags, but I'm not sure which one because there's a bunch of different ones.
Okay, Maka, what is that?
Um, the same answer. It's one of the LGBT flags, but I think it might be the one for bisexual. Not sure.
Okay, Katya, what is that?
It's the transgender flag.
Okay. Anybody else want to jump in? I'm not even sure who's on. Regardless, okay, we'll move on. We're going to cover a bit of territory, and in essence, actually, I'm just going to stop share so I can scoot past. In essence, the okay. In essence, the topic will range from history, information, and mindset. So those are sort of the three themes. I'll now go back to screen share. I have to find it again. Oh boy. As we say, it's interesting. It disappears on one mode. So bear with me. Okay. So in 1978, a gentleman by the name of Gilbert Baker determined that he was going to make a symbol representing people with alternative lifestyles. I'll generalize it that way. And ended up making this flag and I'm juxtaposing this a little out of order because at this point it's 1978. And it gets utilized in a Pride Parade for the first time in 1979. And you'll notice that there are 8 colors. And he had for each of the layers, the rows, he had it designated as a specific thing, which I'm not going to go into. But it started to represent homosexuality, bisexuality, LGBTQ2 plus. And he eventually, actually, I'm not certain really that it was him. It eventually morphed into this symbol, and you'll notice it has 7 colors, basically becoming the rainbow flag, right? Because the colors of the rainbow represented there, a blue, indigo, violet at the end. And the reason why it morphed into this flag was because pink fabric was too difficult to get. And so they couldn't, for quite a period of time, even if they wanted to, make the 8-color flag. And then eventually it was changed by, let's see, it was changed by whomever. He wasn't directly involved at this point anymore. But at any rate, it ended up becoming the flag that we're far more familiar with today. 6 colors. They morphed the lighter blue and the darker blue of the rainbow colors, the blue and the indigo blue of the rainbow into one blue and made it sort of, as you see on the screen, a royal blue. And this all happened within a year. So he developed the flag in 1978, and by 1979, it had become, it morphed into this variant. And it was particularly in California where this took off, San Francisco, no surprise, in a sense, but it was something that caught on, and as we know, has gone around the world. And I'm going to come back to, so right now we're just talking about the pride flag, what's become known as the pride flag. And this is also a symbol, pink triangle. And is anyone familiar with the symbol at all? Anyone, any encountering of it online, or any information that you've ever crossed paths with on it?
I think it was
Okay.
used during
Go ahead, John.
World War II by the Nazis to put on homosexual people to identify them as like an armband, like the Star of David was for Jews.
And actually, Jonathan, excellent. Thank you for that. It actually wasn't an armband. It was evidently in Nazi Germany, every prisoner had to have on their chest a colored emblem which represented why they were in prison. And the pink triangle ended up becoming what was representative of homosexuals sexual deviants, pedophiles. And as a consequence, it had very, let's just say, emotive implications. And what the homosexual community ended up doing eventually was to own the symbol, to turn it from something very derogatory and horrific into their own. And so it became the symbol of protest against homophobia, particularly in the 1970s. And still, even today, will surface different places in terms of being a symbol of LGBT pride and queer rights, just generally. Katya, you were correct. This is the transgender flag, what's become known as the transgender flag. And just before I get started with this, or I did want to add two other things in terms of the pink triangle. The inverted triangle was a symbol of incarceration, whether in concentration camps, prisons in Germany. And as I said originally, the triangles had different colors, pink being representative of homosexual men in particular, but also any kind of what they labeled as a sexual deviant. And interestingly, women, lesbian women, bisexual women, or transgender men were not systematically imprisoned in Nazi Germany. They were labeled asocial in a sense, but they weren't necessarily instantly thrown into prison. And they had the symbol of a black triangle, just out in society or wherever. I mean, it's interesting how in that era in Germany, it was so commonplace to be, in a sense, labeling people and designating, according to different criteria, just who they were with some of these different symbols and so on. And today, there have been pink memorials to remember the homosexual individuals that died in war, and people killed in the Holocaust, homosexual individuals killed in the Holocaust, and also just as a symbol of anti-gay, homophobic violence, and even to the point of death. So the transgender flag is it was a flag developed by a woman in 1999, and has gone through, as with the pride flag, has gone through various changes, developments, variations, some of them not without controversy, in that the people sometimes that they're meant to support are not necessarily in favor of it. And sometimes commercialization or different aspects to the development of a variant flag or symbol have caused people to be very wary of adding things on or embellishing or making it stand for something that becomes very much, in some cases, almost like lip service, or tacking on so many different things that people just, well, everybody's equal kind of attitude. They just get overwhelmed and this is getting ridiculous. Sort of like political correctness got moved into that realm of easy to mock kinds of things. So Monica Helms herself said about the flag that she developed, the stripes at the top and bottom are light blue, the traditional, we could say stereotypical, masculine color. The stripes next to them are pink, the traditional feminine color. The stripe in the middle is white for those who are transitioning or consider themselves having a neutral or undefined gender. So that was in 1999. And it's interesting, just little tidbits to add in. Philadelphia became the first county government in the US to officially raise the transgender pride flag in 2015. And remained next to the US and City of Philadelphia flags for the entirety of the conference that they were hosting that particular time in 2015. And Philadelphia, of course, city of brotherly love, city of love, and very important in the 7 churches amongst the 7 plus 1, the eight churches implicated in Revelation. Anyway, 2 other little tidbits. An emoji version of the flag was added to the emoji slate of choice in 2020. By the way, the LGBTQ one was added, in 2016. So it's interesting. And now many times something like that will pop up as you're texting and typing things, depending on what it is you've entered. As you know, the emoji sometimes will pop up or autocorrect or whatever. And there ended up being, because so many transgender individuals were bullied, faced violence, murdered, etc. Particularly, there were 2 transgender women who ended up being killed. And so there was a transgender Day of Remembrance. The first one occurred in 1999, but it is thereafter, it's November 20th. That is the Transgender Day of Remembrance, or International Transgender Day of Remembrance, because it is Netherlands, different countries around the world honor that date, November 20th. And it's something that has become very prevalent in the world generally, that not necessarily do people of the queer community acknowledge transgender individuals. Many times those in the queer community that are not supportive of transgender are very vocal, and on social media, YouTube, and so on, running an information campaign about how transgender individuals are not a part of their community. And so that's kind of an interesting development that has happened over the last several years. And I'm wanting to go into a couple of things that are just more some information things a little bit. Gender dysphoria. And it actually is a medical designation. It's changed from the original diagnosis was gender identity disorder, but it was replaced with gender dysphoria in 2013 to get away from the stigma of quote unquote a disorder. And sort of one of the steps of the gender timeline, gender equality timeline. And it's basically the mismatch that an individual experiences, gender dysphoria, this mismatch that an individual experiences between their gender identity, their personal sense of their own gender, what gender they are, and gender expression, but their gender identity and the sex assigned at birth. So, as we would put it, there's an incongruence between the mind and the biological flesh, their felt gender and their assigned gender at birth. And AMAB or AMAF, or pardon me, AFAB. So let me say that again. AMAB or AFAB, assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth. And these are actual terms that have entered the medical field in terms of dealing with people and any number of transgender people in particular get designated as such. Gender dysphoria ends up being something that can be treated usually with psychological counseling, just basic support, whatever way a person is expressing gender, their gender expression, if they're dressing one way, just being supported in that, and also to the place of the gender transition, physical transition with hormone replacement therapy, the genital surgery, electrolysis or laser hair removal, breast surgery or reconstruction, and various other kinds of surgeries. And so I just wanted to read. And this comes back to some of the discussion last week, but puberty blockers, a review of puberty blockers published in a mental health medical paper. Puberty blockers are reversible in that they are associated with such positive outcomes as decreased suicidality in adulthood, improved affect and psychological functioning, and improved social life. And the American Psychological Association states, due to the dynamic nature of puberty development, lack of gender-affirming interventions, could be social, psychological, medical, is not a neutral decision. Youth often experience worsening dysphoria and negative impact on mental health as the incongruent and unwanted puberty progresses. Trans-affirming treatment, such as the use of puberty suppression, is associated with the relief of emotional distress and notable gains in psychosocial and emotional development in trans and gender diverse youth. Now, there is a scale, Tanner scale, and it goes from level 1, Tanner 1, Roman numeral I, through level 5, Roman numeral V. And it is to represent the maturity stages of human development. Basically, people going through growth, and it's not tied to chronological age. It is an indicator of maturity stages. Every human being different, the timing for things will be different, individual differences, unique, and consequently the Tanner scale is used when some of the waymarks have been achieved. Then it's an individual moves from Tanner 2 to Tanner 3, for example, or whatever the case is. And it's for children and adolescents, and it takes them through to adulthood, and it can end up continuing into even the early 20s. For example, in the case of height, it's not actually an aspect of the Tanner scale, but height often will peak in females between ages of 14 and 16 as puberty progresses. And for males, it can be 17 to 19. But sometimes full growth of height isn't attained, for example, with young men until they're 21, 22 years of age. So there's a little bit of fluidity there. And the Tanner scale is basically, that's why height isn't a part of it. It's using primary and secondary sex characteristics and breasts, genitals, testicular volume, and growth of pubic hair. It's basically the framework used, and it was developed in 1969 by a man by the name of James Tanner, as he was working with actually young women, girls going through puberty. But and one of the things, again, not that's on the Tanner scale, but is voice change. And voice is an interesting thing. I was listening to a little clip of Elon Musk speaking, and he's got quite a distinctive voice, quite an interesting voice, even when AI is trying to replicate it. And so there probably are, as with every human being's real voice, some challenges for AI to pull it off adequately. But Elon Musk's voice is very definitely a distinctive, in terms of pitch, resonance, etc., etc. And likewise, for all of us, our voices are an identifying characteristics that we carry with us. And we know that when Jesus comes again and the resurrected dead and the living translated all, are taken back to heaven until the end of the millennium, that it is going to be aspects of us that are recognizable, because of course those that come out of the grave come with their glorified bodies. Those who are translated are glorified, changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. And it is going to be, and even through the millennium, as we're in heaven, in New Jerusalem, still in heaven, or Jerusalem in heaven, it will be aspects like our voice that other people, as they encounter us, will identify, as well as some other characteristics. So voice is very important. And for transgender individuals, people that have transitioned from one sex from male, from one gender to another, male to female, female to male, because of this disconnect, voice becomes very crucial. Without the use of the puberty blockers, the voice box and the larynx of a male or a female born such at birth does change through puberty, particularly for males. The Adam's apple does distend more. The voice and sometimes will crack for a little bit, initially just very temporarily, but the voice will change in pitch, usually down an octave. And so the non opportunity of having puberty blocked for young people can have some fairly devastating effects as they later do transition and possibly end up having to have more extensive intervention. Voice and language therapy, voice therapy, is a very much used way of dealing and helping people who are transitioning at whatever age. Surgery obviously can play a role as well. And it's something that ends up being, in a sense, a little bit of a bone of contention. For example, voice feminization or voice masculinization. Is it going to be covered by medical? And many would argue, it's aesthetics. That doesn't qualify, as opposed to those that believe, and many in the medical profession are here, those that believe that it is meant to be something that is needful, medically needful, psychologically needful for an individual to feel fully comfortable with who they are and how they present to other human beings, and voice being a very big part of that. So some of these ongoing dialogues and so on are things that have happened and will continue to happen. I'm sure speech pathologists being involved in a large part of the different kinds of treatments, and then just how it unfolds for individuals and how they're received, in a work or a school environment and so on, particularly through their whole transitioning phase. And a couple of terms I'm just going to share: transgender erasure, systematic individual or organizational discrimination against transgender people. And it can be informational erasure, institutional erasure. And there was a 2009 Canadian study of healthcare for transgender people that is the most prominent barrier to people seeking help, seeking medical assistance, and so on, is this being erased, an attitude, perception that as a transgender individual, they're being erased, at work, at school, in society generally. And sometimes there's a lack of information. That's why social media has played such an important role in terms of a lot of people being able to find each other and find support groups and be able to realize they're not alone. They don't have to stay hidden. They don't have to feel less than. They don't have to ignore the incongruence, perhaps, that they're feeling inside themselves. They can move forward and become who they really were meant to be. In the study, there was, I'm just going to read several areas where medical people, employers, believers in equality should be sensitive to these areas in dealing with a person who is transgender. Gender attribution and discrimination, pronouns, all sorts of things come into that. Attributing something to somebody and they've changed their name and they're being called by their former name, just all sorts of things. Possible feelings of shame and guilt. Consequences of the coming out process, just generally, as somebody shares with family, more intimate acquaintances, but also beyond, becomes very public in their coming out. Spouse, partner, family attitudes, employment issues, incidents of HIV, AIDS, and racial and cultural differences. Quite a lot of the research points out that people of color, who also are, here's the intersectionality, transgender, bear more of the negative aspects because of racial and cultural differences. So, as you obviously guessed, what I'm speaking about today is transgender. But as I say, I'm going through a little bit of history, a little bit of information, and sort of finishing off with just a general topic at the end. But we know that we're going to remain in Agitation of the Sunday law. Period for a little while yet. And this is in part why I selected this topic. I just want to learn more myself and hopefully be able to retain it. And the agitation of the Sunday law is, in a sense, something corporate that as a movement we have to understand, but also obviously individually we have to understand. And in with that, what I'm going to do is select some of the events, some of the different things that have impacted, I'll just say, King of the North. And we'll do a little bit in terms of King of the South. But, and with that, I'll just leave that for now. And just as a review, the first thing that I want to make mention of is (1969). And when we hear the word Stonewall, we maybe didn't pay attention to it. Those of us that were alive then, we didn't pay attention to it at the time. But the riots in Greenwich Village, New York, after the police raided gay bars, one in particular, the Greenwich Inn, or Stonewall Inn, rather, there in Greenwich Village. And the riots continued the next day, you know, and it galvanized people, as one can only imagine. And they continued over the next couple of evenings, and it was, in a sense, the thing that really gelled for the LGBTQ plus community, that they needed to, enough's enough, that they need to become activists and reveal all of the discrimination that is happening. And so it was a pivotal point in the history for sure. And just wanted to see if I have a couple of things I wanted to highlight. Interestingly, something I didn't know, but a lot of the American gay bars evidently were owned by the Italian-American mafia. I mean, I know mafia involvements, gangs, Hells Angels, whatever, are involved with all sorts of things, notwithstanding motorcycles and so on. But at any rate, that was an interesting little factoid. And a year after the uprising, to mark the anniversary on June 28th, 1970, was when the first gay pride marches began. And it was in San Francisco, Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York City. So very interesting. Then we could jump along. I mean, obviously, I'm only highlighting a few different things. And so in 2015, the court case that ended up making it possible for gay marriage at the federal level, involving, impacting every state in the union, gay marriage being allowed, and very able participants in that court case. Was it James? Yes, James Ogerbefell and his partner, John Arthur James, who was the one that had a condition, a disease whereby he died shortly after they actually were married. But it was because of that case that it opened up same-sex marriage in the United States, something that many, many, many protested against. And Supreme Court, federal Supreme Court, ruling that the 14th Amendment requires all states to license marriages between same-sex couples and to recognize all marriages that were lawfully performed out of state. And landmark case. Of course, we have 2018. Masterpiece. Big shop. And again, the Supreme Court going to the Supreme Court, federal Supreme Court, the Supreme Court, in a sense, leaving things unfinished because they, in their ruling and so on, we're not going to address some of the underlying issues. And let me see. And in Colorado, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission had determined that the bakery had discriminated against the gay couple that wanted to have them make a wedding cake for them. And that all of the appeals at the state level were upheld, but that's why it eventually ended up in the federal Supreme Court, whereby it was interesting. The court ruled, Supreme Court, 7-2, that the commission, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, did not employ religious neutrality, violating Masterpiece owner Jack Phillips' rights to free exercise. And so they overturned the Colorado Civil Rights Commission's decision. But the Supreme Court did not rule on the broader intersection of anti-discrimination laws, free exercise of religion, and the freedom of speech. And so it left it open-ended for other cases to end up happening. Then we've got 2021. And the Equality Act. Unfinished business from 1974. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 ended up in an Equality Act being formulated. And 10 years later, in 1974, but it never got completed. It didn't pass the Senate. And in a sense, it's still pending, right? Whether or not they're going to ever pass it or have to redo it, or exactly what is. And I'm just going to show a screen of the, whoops, see my controls, of some of the progress there, just how it worked. So various Congresses, 2015, 114th Congress, and died in committee, both the House of Representatives as well as in the Senate, died in committee. 115th Congress, Equality Act of 2017, died in committee, House of Representatives, died in committee in the Senate. 116th Congress, Equality Act of 2019, both of these 115th and 116th, of course, during Donald Trump's term, 2016 to 2020. And during that time period, because of Democratic control, it passed the House, but it died in committee for the Senate. 117th Congress, Equality Act, 2021, some changes again happening. And it passed the House of Representatives, but it died in committee in the Senate. The 118th Congress last year, Equality Act of 2023, referred to committees of jurisdiction for the House of Representatives and referred to committees of jurisdiction for the Senate. And as I say, whether or not it actually ends up at any point being passed or being changed or starting over from square one will yet remain to be seen. Okay. And then also 2023, put the Equality Act both places. We've got 303 creative. Many felt was a trumped up case, no pun intended, that a woman ended up online business, didn't even really have a case of where she had a customer had come to her, but at any rate, ended up that the in a sense legal term sentiorari, that's the way it's been left, whereby that court, the court, if that case appears again, it'll pick up where it's left off in a sense. But so Supreme Court granted certiorari to them, and it ended up oops, in Colorado that in June 2023 that the Supreme Court ruled in her favor, stating that Colorado's anti-discrimination law, which she was afraid she was going to be punished for violating, anti-discrimination law cannot compel a website designer to create products that include speech they disagree with. So that was a fairly big landmark case. And going to put up 2024. And there have been a lot of things dealing with transgender rights and rights being taken away over the last year and a half, really, but particularly over the course of last year. Sports being one of the biggest arenas in which the controversy has flared up, different states, different situations, and so on. But two cases in more recent time, and I want to actually just bring up. I'm just going to do it on screen share, but I won't. An article in The Guardian. Republicans are redefining the word equal in an Iowa anti-trans bill. And a transgender reporter, Erin Reed, had written an opinion. She's an independent journalist, but she'd written an opinion piece for The Guardian. And very interesting. Now, I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs of it. On Tuesday afternoon, and this is February 8th, 2024. On Tuesday afternoon, the Iowa House Education Committee met to debate House Study Bill 649, a bill proposed by the Republican governor. The bill would end legal recognition for transgender people anywhere male and female appear in Iowa code, and would require special gender markers for transgender people on birth certificates. Measures that were compared to pink triangles once used to identify LGBTQ plus people by Nazis in the 1940s. Perhaps the most ambitious attempt to discriminate against transgender people in the proposed legislation, however, is through redefining the word equal in the bill. The bill states that when it comes to transgender people, the term equal does not mean same or identical, which raises the question, what does equal even mean? The bill does not define the word, however, only declares that equal no longer means same or identical. Within the state of Iowa, for transgender people, when the sponsor was asked directly what the word equal means to this bill, it was a woman, Heather Hora, and she stammered around and she said, and she couldn't come up with an answer. That's the person who put the bill forward. The bill's sponsor is not content with redefining the word equal, however. The bill goes on to proclaim that separate is not inherently unequal. One opponent to the bill pointed to the cruel history of the doctrine of separate but equal during the civil rights era, and the attempt to revive that history with a new Republican-condoned target, transgender people. Though the new definition of the word equal and the revival of the separate but not equal doctrine only applies to transgender people, the precedents that make up the bedrock of equality for all are threatened. So what is impacting the smallest segment of population, smaller than the homosexual community, the transgender population, smallest segment of population dealing with gender identity. And it's being affected, but it has ramifications for all of us in terms of equality. Equally important is the means by which the bill establishes transgender people as separate. The bill mandates that transgender people be given unique identities on their birth certificates, outing them as transgender. Anyone born in Iowa who wishes to change their birth certificate after obtaining gender-affirming care would be forced to have both gender markers, past and what they've transitioned to, gender markers on their birth certificates, making their transgender identity obvious anytime they use their birth certificate. This raises the question, why is it so important for the state to readily identify transgender people? And the other one I want to bring up, and just read a little portion of it, deals with Wyoming, the state. House Bill 156 would define gender-affirming care to be not in the best interest of youth in Wyoming. The bill affects guardianships, custody fights, and child protective services, the equivalent of our children's services department. A new bill in Wyoming, House Bill 156, would declare that gender-affirming care is not in the best interest of transgender youth within the state. The bill would apply this presumption to custody battles, guardianships, and even the rules around child protective services, raising real concerns that transgender youth could be removed from affirming parents that are supportive of them having HRT, hormone replacement therapy, gender puberty blockers, affirming the transitioning of that young person, affirming parents, and follow best practice, pardon me, and take them out of the affirming parents' care. The bill has 13 sponsors, including the House Majority Leader, making it a significant threat for passage in the states, and appears influenced by a recent social media firestorm among the far right over a transgender teen in Montana. And so we can see it's tightening up, and it's often state by state by state, because this is where it's happening at the local level in Canada, province by province. But it's this tension and this battling between, is it the transgender rights that are going to be upheld, or is it an ideology, a belief system, a mindset amongst those who win the day in court or in the legislature, writing the laws? So we've in the past, there's lots in the public record of various studies and so on, seeing that it is a worldwide, global phenomenon, what's happening, and that reasserting of patriarchy and cultural norms and affirming anti-LGBTQ2 plus and patriarchal mindset is spreading. We have a situation in Africa, Ghana and Kenya. Elder Tabo spoke to that a year ago. And Asia, we've got what's going on in India, democracy going down the tube. Korea with all of the male rights activism amongst young men in South Korea. We've got Russia, and I'll speak to that more fully in a moment. And we've got Greece, just this past week, affirming the same-sex marriage, which is a real paradigm shift. So we'll see what happens with that. Sometimes when some things pass that are positive things, good things, what ends up happening is the backlash on the right and on the far right comes back even more full force against and wins greater advances and so on. And that's what we're seeing in this agitation of the Sunday law period, some of this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and sort of like a game of chess, move and counter move and until check or checkmate. And as we approach the American election 2024 in November, and the thought that Donald Trump could be the Republican representative delegate and actually could be the one that wins the election. All of these tensions and these various things that are happening are very important in terms of where individual states, provinces stand, where the country itself is going, whatever nation of the world it is, but also to where we individually are. And I'm going to go into a little bit to deal with Canada right now, because much as we're not nationalists living in Canada, I think we do have a little bit of a history that bears, I was just going to say bears repeating, or at least reviewing. And so just want to share screen again. And here we go. More onerous. I will be honest on this. Anyway, let me see if I can forward to the next screen. Elder Tabo last Sabbath dealt with some of what has been happening in Alberta, and we had a very excellent discussion on all of that. And I want to take opportunity to review a little bit more just the general history within Canada. And draw things to a close fairly soon. 1950s and the 1960s, the RCMP monitors the activities of private individuals suspected of being gay, homosexual. 1950s and 60s, there's an anti-homosexual campaign within the civil service, euphemistically referred to as the security campaign. And why it was even happening. It was deemed that homosexuals posed a threat to national security, and therefore it led to the identification of thousands of suspected gay men and lesbian women. And you can imagine the stigma. And yeah, anyway. The Canadian military has zero tolerance in the 1950s and 60s. I mean, prior to that too, but I mean, zero tolerance for out of the closet homosexuals, often giving them a dishonorable discharge if they came out of the closet or it was found out they were outed by somebody, they were given a dishonorable discharge from the military. 1968 through to 1969, decriminalization of homosexuality with the passing of the Criminal Law Amendment Act, 1968. It passed in 1969 to reform the criminal code on broad-ranging social issues such as homosexuality, abortion, and contraception. And the person bringing that all into the forefront was the Minister of Justice, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. 1969, it was amended. So homosexuality was decriminalized. Interesting that it also dealt with abortion and reproductive rights. 1981, police raids. So February 5th, 1981, 4 gay bathhouses in Toronto were raided by police, the largest mass arrest since the War Measures Act was invoked during the October crisis. The day after, February 6th, a protest in downtown Toronto, seeing 3,000 people protest those arrests. And that's, in a sense, the bellwether. It's considered to be Canada's Stonewall. The 1990s, various court cases moving things forward towards LGBTQ2+ rights being acknowledged and put into law. 1992, ban on homosexuals in the Canadian Armed Forces lifted officially. And that was under the Attorney General at the time was Kim Campbell, who eventually later became Prime Minister, allowing them to serve openly and live on base with their partners, homosexual partners. 1996, on June 20th, 1996, Bill C-33, which adds sexual orientation to the Canadian Human Rights Act, received royal assent. And there were, I can remember, I mean, Bill C-33 was in the media, and there was a lot of antagonistic press. Let's just put it that way. 2005, same-sex marriage sanctioned on June 28th, 2005 with the Federal Civil Marriage Act. Canada being the fourth country at that time to do this. So same-sex marriage approved. 2013, the House of Commons passes Bill C-279, a private member's bill sponsored by Randall Garrison, which officially extends human rights protections to transgender and transsexual people in Canada. 2013. 2017, gender identity and gender expression are added to the Canadian Human Rights Act and to the Criminal Code as protected grounds from discrimination, hate publications, and advocating genocide. 2017, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau apologizes to the LGBTQ2+ community in the House of Commons, puts in motion the repealing of Section 159 of the Criminal Code, and puts in place moving forward with reparations. And reparations, errors from the purge included errors from the purge of the 1950s, this ongoing vendetta against anybody simply because they were homosexual. Errors from the purge of the 1950s through the 1990s, resulting in criminal records of individuals being destroyed. So the correcting of the errors of the 1950s was to destroy those files. And remember, obviously, the 1950s and 60s with the residential school fiasco in Canada, a lot of wrongs going on in another arena all at the same time. We were not very nice people, Canadians, in the 50s and 60s. Has much changed. And also in 2017, part of the reparations, when Justin Trudeau apologized and so on, civil servants and military personnel who lost their livelihoods from this discriminatory policy being fired. I'm homosexual. Getting fired. Discriminatory policy based on sexual orientation would share in a $110 million settlement of a class action lawsuit. And just as a little side note, in Ontario in 2017, unanimously passed the Trans Day of Remembrance Act, and officially recognizing the Trans Day of Remembrance, November 20th, and requiring the Legislative Assembly of Ontario to hold a minute of silence every year on November 20th. So 2019 in Canada, repealing the Section 159, this horrific provision allowing for all this discrimination against homosexual individuals. It was repealed and amended. It amended the criminal code to eliminate direct and indirect discrimination, including dropping the age of consent for all sexual acts to 16. Portions had been at 19, portions had been at 18. Anal sex being one of the sexual acts really being spoken to. And and then 2021, Canadian census, and I don't think I put it into my, let me just check my PowerPoint because there is a, oh, there is one slide on it. I'll give a bit of information and then I'll share screen. Canada's population 2021, 30.5 million individuals 15 years of age and over. Of that, transgender population equals 59,460 or 0.19%. And non-binary population is, and this is people identifying as neither male nor female, man or woman. They'll use other terms to self-identify, such as fluid, agender, queer, gender non-conforming, two-spirit, and that two-spirit, the two-digit, is to represent many of the Indigenous people who identify that way, actually throughout North America. But the non-binary was 41,355.14% of the Canadian population. So together, we're talking about alternative lifestyle individuals, gender orientation people in Canada of 0.33% of the population. Not even 1%. Now, this is taken from the 2021 Canada Census. And again, people filling out census and people being honest and sharing some of the information that will out them and so on. Well, I mean, it's anonymous, but at the same time, I shouldn't say that, it's not anonymous, but I mean, they are very cautious about doing. So just to put it in perspective a little bit, 1 in 300 people in Canada, so we can think of this on the individual level, where you live right now. Generally, 1 in 300 people in Canada aged 15 and older are transgender or non-binary. 1 in 150 people aged 15 to 34 in Canada are transgender or non-binary. In comparison, for those aged 35 and over, 1 in 550 people in Canada are transgender or non-binary. And interestingly, there's a higher proportion of transgender and non-binary people in Nova Scotia and BC. So in those two provinces, it's 1 in 100 people aged 15 to 34 that are transgender or non-binary. And Quebec and Saskatchewan are two of the provinces that have the lowest proportion of transgender and non-binary people. So in Canada generally, just one other stat, 0.2% of the population aged 18 and older was transgender in 2021. And in comparison, Belgium has 0.5%, and New Zealand has 0.5%, in comparison to Canada's 0.2% that are transgender in 2021. And it's the screen share quickly.
So when we say transgender, it's people who've actually transitioned?
Yes, they are identifying on the census. They have transitioned to their new name, yes, Sakai. Good question.
So those numbers don't actually technically cover the whole population.
No, it's done the
Just
age
for people who
range.
just for the people who've actually transitioned. Because there's people who haven't transitioned that are trans.
Yes.
Because I guess when I'm thinking just about our landscape in Canada, I can see why Saskatchewan would be the least percentage. Not because there's the least occurrence, but there's the least. I would expect to see Saskatchewan to be lower numbers based on the culture, not based
Yes.
on the actual people who need that gender affirming care.
Very good point. The courage it takes to, I mean, fill in a form or see a census or to make it very public is dependent upon the culture where that person is living. And it does vary a little province to province. The fact that BC and Nova Scotia and also Ontario is in there, I mean, it's not mentioned, but I mean, having a higher proportion of transgender and non-binary populations. And interestingly, a large portion are in the largest metropolitan centers in Canada. You know, the Montreals, the Torontos, the Vancouver. And not to generalize too much, but they found that more non-binary people lived in urban settings than even, I mean, transgender people often were in urban settings too, but more non-binary in proportion were living in urban settings. And it's interesting because, you know, as I was researching this a little bit, I was thinking to myself, you know, rural and small town, you know, just having moved from a small town ourselves, there is an anonymity that comes with city living a little bit. You can go about your business incognito a little bit. I mean, your friends, your family, you know, people that you choose to interact with and so on are aware. But otherwise, in many cases, your neighbors and you know, other people just generally in the public could care less. They're not paying attention to what you're doing. So there is as a safety, interestingly, with our move, we had a transgender woman that was one of the movers, the lead mover, actually. And she, you know, was just sharing. She had just moved downtown. And we were talking about that a little wee bit. And she was just saying that she's just loving it. And I didn't ask her from where she had moved, like whether a small community or, you know, just exactly where, or out of province even, but interesting. These things are interesting things that and some very good questions, Sakai, and a good line of thinking you were taking us on. So this was a chart from that 2021 census that I just thought to share because I mean all the different names and so on. I'll start at the bottom. Greatest and interwar generations. So those identifying as transgender or non-binary in that era. And of course, that was an era of, people born in, I think 1928, or was it 1908? Might have been, sorry, I forgot the date. Anyway, the research, the greatest generation, as I said, I've forgotten whether it was 1928, I'll just use that. And the interwar generation, those born, I believe it was 1939, no, 1940, maybe, that they used as the division. Here they've morphed them together. So anyone born 1945 or earlier, and a few of us are starting to get up there. we're gonna land well, the baby boomers born between 1946 and 65. So you can see it's growing a little bit more comfortable to be able to identify as transgender or non-binary. Generation X, 1966 and 1980. So you can see as it's moving up, younger and younger. Millennials, 1981 to 1996, a larger portion of the population. Generation Z, born between 1997 and 2006. And Elder Parminder was the one, I believe, that brought that out in one of his studies in terms of how the younger generation stands a chance. I couldn't quite remember how he worded it, but in terms of changing mindset, in terms of growing, in terms of becoming more empathetic, and some of those different things. And that's it. The thing I wanted to sort of end off with was in terms of mindset. Well, actually, before I get to that, I did want to, King of the South, I mean, I'm out of time, and but I did want to share one thing. Because after Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin and so on, I want us, I mean, King of the North and King of the South, we know that the follow the institutions at the Sunday Law is coming, the USA and the SDA corporate church. And the King of the South, how it will actually look like in terms of the death of the King of the South. These entities aren't going to go away. They're still going to exist, but it's how they manifest. Anyway, November 17th, 2023, in St. Petersburg, Putin was attending what was it? Oh, the cultural, 9th International Culture Forum. Very appropriate title, right? Culture. Anyway, two things happened on November 17th, 2023. Putin, attending this forum, was asked some questions. And basically it was in the context, I mean, it's sort of the time frame, building up towards various awards, programs, Academy Awards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was in that context, he had been asked by whomever, reporter or whatever, that it appears that LGBTQ topics are being made mandatory for winning Western film contests. And what did Putin think about that? So this is a part of what it was that he said. Indeed, we see that in order to win something at contests in Western countries, it is necessary either to tell write, or show the life of sexual minorities, transgenders, and all sorts of transformers. Many names. I'll tell you something unexpected. Still quoting Putin. Was going to actually show the little bit of the clip so you could see his facial expressions. But anyway, these topics and these people, they also have the right to win, show, tell. Because this is also part of society. So that at that point, there was a little wee bit of mild applause. He continues. This is what people live for. This is his zinger. It's only bad if they are the only ones to win the competitions. And at this point, he starts to laugh heartily. It's not necessary. It's of no use. And he's laughing and laughing. And then there's a lot louder applause at that point. November 17th, 2023, that exact same day, what else happened in Russia? The Russian government files lawsuits against the LGBTQ movement into the Russian Superior Court or Supreme Court, and to ban the international extremist public LGBTQ movement. So Putin plays a political game, and it's going to be interesting just to see what happens in reference to LGBTQ, but particularly transgender and non-binary individuals in the approaching Sunday law. And that's it. There had been a little bit of a history prior in 2023. Putin had basically banned surgeries for gender identity, gender transitioning, and other than where there are in children congenital anomalies. That would be, for example, intersex people born with both sets of gonads, or just whatever the anomaly is. There's a whole spectrum of different things, but basically only then would surgery be legal in Russia. And generally that's done almost at birth in a sense. I mean, generally they'll perform some kind of surgery right after birth to make an individual a specific sex, a specific gender. Anyway, the mindset that we have, where does our movement sit? But equally as important, probably more importantly, is where individually am I? How do we change our mindset? How do we transform? And education is certainly one of them. I had wanted to look a little at how does a mindset develop, like bullying, oppression, narcissism, some of these makes right attitudes from childhood that an individual often ends up having. And we can come to the look at things that are different, something that's different to me, or that, well, I'll just use that word, different. And there's can be a spectrum of how we deal with it. We can ignore, we can stay different about the whole situation, off my radar, don't ever think about it kind of attitude. We can be in the center. We can be neutral about it. We can observe, no real position, one way or the other. It doesn't affect me kind of attitude. But technically not opposed, but also not supportive. And then other end of the spectrum, we can become actively engaged about, become an activist on behalf of transgender and LGBTQ rights. And activists are on both sides, right? Anti on the left, anti-homophobia, I'll just label it on the left, right to the, well, far, far right, but right to the right of anti-LGBTQ rights. So there can be activists on both sides. But where we end up, I'd like to suggest that there would be, on that spectrum, there'd be another Weimar, and that's sort of where we are at, the agitation of the Sunday law. Educating ourselves, watching ourselves, catching any microaggressions, any attitudes, any mocking, any humor. You know, that little video clip that I ended up being able to see, Putin in November, and this laughter and this, you know, I want to ensure that I don't have any kind of othering left in me. And so it's an individual path that we all have to sort out for ourselves, but at the same time, it does begin with education. And in a sense, that's where it was that, or why it was in part that I wanted to pick this topic. And I want to just finish with the one slide. Move it to White House in rainbow colors. And I honestly don't know if at some point in time they've done it in transgender colors. But on this path back to Eden, the path of equality, and it's a lot bigger than just that word equality, obviously. Will we be supportive of the least in our midst, the least amongst us, and really become who it is God wants us to be in the closing moments of this Earth's history? And I know it's a challenge to each of us, challenged for me personally, to allow God to really purge everything that is the dross that we've carried, maybe even cherished. But at any rate, it has to go. And with that, we'll have our closing prayer. Dear God of heaven and earth, we are on a journey. We're on a path. The path leads to heaven. It is a path of success. And we just ask that you all continue to help us to understand as different current events come forward and various legal things are happening. And in the US, the executive branch election is here, and throughout the world, over 65 different countries. Russia in March is having an election, king of the South. As we just are part of all that's going on in this world, observers, but also participants in, will you continue to speak to our hearts and transform us? There are different ways of handling things. You know, there was quite a discussion in WhatsApp in terms of protesting, to protest or not to protest, etc. And we just want to rightly divide your word so that we deal with each thing in the best way possible, aware of being the servant of the Most High God and aware of the work you have set for us. And we want to do our job. So be with us in the days ahead. 2024 is going to be an important year in terms of the agitation of the Sunday law. So bless us with wisdom. In Jesus' name, for his sake. Amen.